Hi everyone. Today we're learning about dichotomous keys. This is a tool that taxonomists and biologists use to help us classify different things, living as well as non-living. So we're going to actually have a lab about this. So I will be referring back to some concepts about the lab. I'm going to be giving you some tips and we're going to have a bit of practice using this tool. And then you're going to kind of take it one step further and actually create your own dichotomous key. So a little bit more info on that after. So first, just what is a dichotomous key? It's a tool we use to help us identify living and non-living things. Dichotomy or dichotomous means divided into parts. So we're going to see soon that essentially we're using steps that have two choices. So if you've ever read any of those books as a kid, which is sort of like a choose your own adventure, you can either go to this page or this page. That's sort of what a dichotomous key is, with the ultimate goal of trying to classify something that you're not sure what it is. So I'm going to show you a couple of examples, which we can use a list of questions or we can organize them as a flowchart. Again, with our goal being ultimately that we are classifying something into a category or into a species that we might not have known where it belonged before. So I'm going to have a little example here. And I'm going to give you an example. I have this writing utensil, which might be familiar to some of you. I'm going to try to use this dichotomous key, use this method to figure out what this is. Imagining I just found this out in nature, or I found this on someone's desk and I didn't know what it was. So the first question, which is labeled there as number 1, says writes with ink or writes with graphite. So this guy writes with ink. So it tells me I need to go to step number 2. Step number 2 says the writing tip is metal or the writing tip is felt, and this has a felt tip. So I'm classifying it as a marker. Okay. Now let's say that I had a second thing which I didn't know what it was, and I wanted to try to classify it. So same thing. So I have this guy. Does it write with ink or graphite? This is graphite. So I'm going to go to step number 4. And then it says body is made of wood or the body is not made of wood. In this case, it actually is made of wood. So I have a regular pencil. And so I have two different things that, imagining I didn't know what they were, I'm essentially using this dichotomous key to try to put them into a category. Okay, so this would be an example of the list of questions. You're going to notice sometimes we list it as like number 1A and number 1B because really it's the same question that we're dealing with, the same trait, okay, the same property. So I'm going to show you an example of that in the practice as well, where we just organize that slightly differently. Similar thing over here. We're essentially organizing it now in a more visual way. So some people prefer this way. I really have no preference. You would choose whichever one that you're more comfortable with for your lab, but the same concept still applies. I look at one trait at a time and I have two very distinct answers for that. So two very obvious answers. So we're going to try this. It's one for insects. So for example, I would look at an insect and I would ask the question, does this have 8 legs or less? Okay. If I say yes, it does, then I go into this direction and I start looking at, then does it have exactly 6 legs? Yes or no, and so forth. Likewise, on the other side, if I had answered no, I would answer those series of questions. And you continue doing this one species at a time, trying to figure out what actually is this organism that you have. So again, we're going to get some practice with this, whichever one that you're more confident with. The one thing I really want to reinforce here is that we're always looking at one trait at a time. Okay, so here I'm talking about what does it write with in question number 1. So if question 1 is talking about, 1A is talking about writing with ink, my second question wouldn't suddenly be, is it made of wood? Okay, it needs to be talking about the exact same trait and just give 2 options for that trait. So that's where the dichotomous part comes from. So I'm going to show you a couple more examples of that, which is more based on pictures and based on physical traits. Again, we're trying to make it so someone can use this as a tool. So we don't want it to be super confusing where they can't actually read through and understand what we're saying. So I'll give you some more examples of that very soon. So here I have more of like, I think, an obvious example because we're familiar with these organisms a little bit more, hopefully. We use the same series of steps. So I choose one of these organisms to start with, essentially. So I'm going to choose, let's say, this guy, organism number 2. Excuse me. So organism number 2, you might know it's a lizard already when you just initially look at it. But what I want to do is walk through the steps. So I know the directions are down here for you to follow, but we'll just do one together. So my first question is, and this is organized in the 1A and B sort of way, the backbone. So presence or absence of the backbone. This is a very clear trait. Okay, it's either yes or no. Okay, that's not like it has half a backbone. Okay, if that were the case, this would not be a good question to use. But in the case of species number 2 here, it does have a backbone. So I'm going to go to question 2. Again, I see number 2A or number 2B. Does it have wings or no wings? Well, in this case, it has no wings. So I'll go to step number 3. Legs, it has legs. We would go to step number 4, and then we ask, does it have a shell or no shell? In this case, it doesn't, which brings us to determine it is a lizard. So what I want to sort of reinforce here, and something we're going to be doing in the lab as well, these are all physical traits. I can see them very clearly from the pictures, okay? I'm not talking about their behavior necessarily. So for example, I'm not mentioning here anything about like where it lives. So I'm not saying it lives in the water, okay, or it doesn't live in the water. The reason I wouldn't want to use that is because some of these, it might not be very clear. Imagine that all you have to work with is the photograph. Okay, if that's the case, I really don't want to put anything that might be confusing to someone using it because I want to use it as a tool. I want it to be pretty easy to use. So hopefully that makes sense. You are going to try one yourself. If you click in this link, it's an example using aliens. So the example I gave over here, it's kind of easy because we actually know what these species are for the most part. So I don't actually need to use a dichotomous key. With the aliens, you can pause my video and try it out. It's a little bit more difficult because I don't actually know what those are. So I'm going to let you practice that on your own. You can pause my video. And I'm going to actually go on a little bit here to show you about the lab. So you're going to find the lab sheets on D2L. I'm going to show you where that is in just a second. There's also going to be what I call a lab quiz. So it's just a short little Google form, which is to determine if you actually understand the content of the lab. So that info I'm going to just go over with you, especially because it's our first lab together. You will find in summer school, because it's only 18 school days, things go rather quickly. So I want to just make sure, especially for this first lab, that everyone is understanding what to do. But you'll find that the labs will pop up and they'll be due shortly after. So just keep in mind those due dates as you're working on it. I'm going to navigate over to our D2L page just to show you what I'm talking about. So what you'll find when you come here is Dropbox. So Dropbox is where you submit assignments through. So I'm going to click over here and hopefully you will see under Unit 1, Diversity of Living Things, you'll see lab number 1. So I'm going to click on that and you'll see some instructions from me. So it says, please submit all documents through this Dropbox link and don't forget to submit the lab quiz Google form, which is also part of your mark. So right now, I have not done any labs, so I don't want to start with the lab quiz. That makes sense, I think. I'm going to click actually onto this guy, which is the Google Doc version. And I want to just point out a few things to you just because this is our first lab together. I will put a little checklist here, like what am I being assessed on? How am I being assessed? So where are marks coming from for this? And as you know, the marks will go on to teach assist, and that comes into your mark calculation later on. So the first thing is research on 10 different organisms. That's worth 10 marks in the knowledge category. You will be creating your own dichotomous key, which is 5 marks in the communications, and then you will have a lab quiz at the end. So you'll notice right here, this is a link to the lab quiz. So I'm not going to open it right now. It's a Google form. You will have one attempt to do it. So you need to make sure that you've understood the lab. And if you do have any questions about the lab as you're working on it, or you need clarification, you can definitely ask me those questions, and that will make you very well prepared for the lab quiz. It's worth 5 marks in thinking. So those 5 marks, it could be like 5 multiple choice type questions or 5 short answer type questions. You will look into that once you get to that point. So you only have one attempt at that, so please make sure that you're clear on everything. I'm not going to go through every step of the lab right now, but if you do have questions, you can ask me. What I wanted to point out though was how you submit it. So up to you, you're welcome to make a copy of this lab and just type your answers right into here. Some people will like to create their own separate document and submit that. Either way is totally fine with me, so whichever that you're comfortable with. But you're going to see here, there is an option for you, add a file. So that is where you are adding your finished product. So the document has the info of what you need to actually submit. You're going to click add a file. And whether your file is on your computer or whether it's part of your Google Drive, I'm asking that you please submit it through this link. Specifically, I would advise you not to share with me on Google Drive because I get a lot of files and I might not actually see it. So when you add it through here, I get a notification that you've handed it in, and that tells me that I can go ahead and mark it. So please make sure that you are submitting everything through this link. And then hopefully from there, I'm able to collect all of the documents that we need. So again, if you do have any questions about this, please reach out to me on D2L, either come by the office hours or write your questions into the discussion forum. Thank you.